Hello, and welcome to this week's character building episode. Today's episode, we're going to center on extracting character from objects. And this is something that Pixar does quite often. You've seen it with everything going back to their very first feature, or very first short, I should say, with the Lugzo Junior lamps. And basically, I'm taking this tea kettle here, and I see a turtle in it. I mean, it's fairly a straightforward step to take, right? It's got the right general shape. All it's missing is the legs and tail, really, and it's got the handle on top, but overall is a very turtle-like shape. So that's what we're going with here. That would be pretty basic thing to do. I mean, it's not terribly interesting or creative. It's almost kind of obvious. So the question would be turkettle. So what would be the next step to do then? What can we do to take this rather interesting tea kettle shape and create a more interesting character out of it? It doesn't have to be a complicated character, but just more interesting, right? And so going back to the kettle now, one way to approach that would be to wrap the entire form as if it was wrapped in paper, right? Like it was gift wrapped. So you pretty much eliminating all the interior nuances and just going for like straight up rounded shapes, wrapping that thing up in as simple shape as possible. So you can see I've done that here, right? So is this shape interesting from a character design standpoint? And for me, the answer is yes, right? And the two criteria I used in this example were: is it asymmetrical, which it is. It's you could say it's lopsided if you want to, but it's not even, right? It's got differences from left to right, top to bottom. And the other thing is it forceful? Is it dynamic? And that's what these arrows I'm drawing here are meant to represent there. So you've got these pushes out in different directions that can indicate, and because the asymmetry works into that, they can be seen as leaning in more than one direction, right? You can go top to right like that, or bottom to up, but it's got a flow to it. And that's what I mean by forceful or dynamic in that sense. So in the next stage here, we've taken that same shape, I've copied it over, and we're going to see if we can fit a character inside of it. So I'm using what's called the ladder method, ladder, or also known as in some places the grid, which is a way of breaking down a larger space into smaller spaces that are just as interesting by using asymmetry to divide up the legs. In this case, the legs, the torso, and the head all are different blocks of space. Like they break into large, medium, and small spaces. Instead of like having three evenly divided spaces, right, for those three parts, you have the chest here, the chest and the hip area. The torso is much bigger. It takes up the largest part of the mass, right? So that's your big section. You've got the legs, which are smaller, and the head, which is smaller still. So that's the basic thinking going on here. I'm just filling in basic geometric forms, turning edges, and center lines, as you can see there. And using the same shape, you can turn it in different directions. You can locate your center lines and turning edges in different places. And every time you do that, it's going to create a slightly different character, a slightly different take on the same character. And if you look at some movies, they rely on this for cohesion, right? To make their cast of characters all feel like they belong in the same movie. You'll often see almost like a cookie cutter stamp like that, where they just keep filling the same shape with different characters based on similar shapes like that. And I think one of the examples that comes to mind most right now, I think, would be like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. If you've seen that movie, a lot of the characters feel like they're coming from the same design in terms of shape, but they're being broken down in different proportions through that shape. Just one of the many techniques that can be used to generate variety, right? So, and it's also great for like if in this case our source shape is that tea kettle, but it can come from anywhere, right? What can we do now further though? Can we take the inspiration of the tea kettle and break it down even more, right? Well, yeah, we can, because the tea kettle itself was a designed object. It was made by someone who's very creative, and they used their own principles of design in creating it. And in doing so, we can dissect that and continue to break down those parts for our own use in different ways. It's almost like you're deconstructing life around you and repurposing it for character design in this case. In this case, I'm taking the nozzle, or the spout, as you see in the upper left-hand corner. Whoops, there we go. And going to get grab a silhouette off of that, right? Going to go through the same analysis. Is it interesting form? This is just to verify that, yes, these are all interesting forms that we're taking off of the tea kettle, not just the overall shape, but also the different parts that make it up. Bring it down, make it a little larger there. Let's go against our checklist here to see how interesting it is. So it definitely passes the first test, right? It's asymmetrical. The curves are not pinching well, actually, I take that back. There is a bit of pinching, but it's not symmetrical, right? Not necessarily symmetrical, because you have the long curve on the upper side and you have two contrasting curves below it, but they do pinch a bit. So, and that doesn't impact on how forceful it is, how dynamic the shape is. So we can fix that a little bit. If we can go in here now, I'm going to make a slight adjustment to reality. You're allowed to do that. And just take that top curve and go from a concave to a slightly convex one there, and while keeping the other curves pretty much as they were. And just that one small change has a pretty big impact on the look of the component shape here that we're going to incorporate into the design. And from there, you can see as we move from one to the other, that transforms into one of the bottom. That's just one of many possible design choices you can make. Conscious and aware, but still, it's your choice. We're moving over here, taking that part and moving it into the previous part design that we had. As we see here, we're moving that shape around, orienting it around, trying to play with it, see where it might fit into the overall design. And where it looks like we're going to fit it in here is right around, it's going to define the feet portion, right? It kind of makes a nice belt line shape, kind of a waistline shape, and you can fill the feet within that, right? And the legs. Slightly different approach. But also because it's derived from the same object, it almost kind of makes it feel more fitting in some way. And here you have the head, which is taken from the kettle handle, right? And it's slightly modified, just like the last time, right? It's slightly modified to be a little more dynamic. Still looks like the handle though. If I were to say it's related to like a relative of the family, right? It's the same family shape. So we haven't lost that. And locating that once and for all. Sizing it. Now, if you don't have digital, this is all done with layers and digital layers here, but if you could always use, for example, cutouts using construction paper and scissors, good old traditional way of doing it, and you can then take those shapes and rearrange them to your heart's content that way. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's perfectly acceptable way to do that as well. And here we go. For the shoes, I think I used the just the top saucer part of the tea kettle. And here we go. Here's our final look at this. So wrapping it up, we have the first iteration on the left, the next iteration using the subcomponents of the tea kettle. There's the tea kettle itself, and it doesn't have to be this simple. Like I said, you can layer and layer and layer detail on this to your heart's content. You can also look up the name Carter Goodrich. He's an excellent character designer who very much is into taking simple shapes and layering plenty of detail on them for things I don't have the time to do today, but are excellent examples nonetheless. If you like this video and want to see more, click subscribe. Want to tell me what to draw? You can. Click on the link to my Patreon page.